Ja, welkom bij Forum Insight. En het is ontzettend spannend, want we zijn live. Dat betekent dat jullie via de superchats ons vragen kunnen stellen. We zitten aan tafel met nu nog Ralf Dekker, Paul Cliteur en Anton van Schijndel. Voor degenen die jou nog niet kennen, Anton, jij bent Tweede Kamerlid geweest ooit voor de VVD. En toen hebben zowel Paul Cliteur als ik op jou gestemd. Ik heb op jou gestemd omdat Paul jou had aanbevolen bij Buitenhof. En ik deed toen ook al altijd wat Paul zegt. Maar toen ben jij ook nog eens een keer een echt integer VVD-lid gebleken. Dat wil zeggen, toen de VVD links afsloeg, ben jij gewoon rechtdoor gegaan. De VVD van Bolkestein hebben we het over, de ouderwetse VVD. En zo ben jij uiteindelijk aanbeland bij Forum voor Democratie. En nu ben je gemeenteraadlid voor Forum voor Democratie. We gaan het met jou hebben onder andere over de herverkiezing van Femke Halsema. Gaat dat lukken of niet? Herbenoeming inderdaad, want ze zeggen wel de burgemeester wordt gekozen, maar eigenlijk is het gewoon benoeming. Nou, Paul, jij bent in Rome geweest, daar gaan we het over hebben. En is één plaatsje leeg, dat is de plaats van John Laughlin. Die zit nu nog in de trein uit Parijs. Die heeft iets vertraging, maar die schuift elk moment aan. En dan gaan we over op het Engels. En dan gaan we het hebben over ons hoofdonderwerp van vandaag. Dat is het World Economic Forum. Dat begint morgen in Davos. Ik ben daar vorig jaar naartoe geweest. Het was daar mooi, moet ik zeggen. Ontzettend mooi. Prachtige plek. Maar er worden natuurlijk de meest vreselijke dingen bekokstoofd. Dus daar gaan we het uitgebreid over hebben. Nogmaals, jullie kunnen je superchats via YouTube stellen. Dan betaal je €1 of €5 of meer mag natuurlijk ook, om hier aan tafel een vraag te stellen. We gaan het iets commercialiseren, dit programma. We hebben allemaal merchandise op stapel staan. Deze glazen zijn binnenkort te koop. De wijnen van Ralf Dekker zijn te bestellen. We gaan ook hoodies laten maken met Forum Insight, zodat je aan de hele wereld kan laten zien wat jouw favoriete tv-programma is of online programma. Nou, daar gaan we het allemaal over hebben, jongens. Maar dat gaan we natuurlijk niet doen zonder Ralf. Een glaasje wijn. Ja. Dry January of niet?
Nee, dat moet. Ik heb een Franse Chardonnay meegenomen. En dat is eigenlijk best bijzonder. Want ik heb net 1,5 week in Mexico doorgebracht. In zo'n all-inclusive resort. Best riant, lekker weer. Maar ze schonken daar alleen maar hele rare Spaanse wijn. Dus ik ben wel blij dat ik weer normale wijn kan drinken. Dit is...
Maar je hebt dus waarschijnlijk gewoon alleen maar Bacardi Cola en dat soort dingen. Dat is
nou, veel van die coronaatjes heb ik... Ja. Maar toch ook wel een glaasje Chardonnay. Maar dat was dan toch een beetje van die Spaanse, wat zurige... Kijk, na een paar glazen dan merk ik niet meer.
Want ik heb de afgelopen periode helemaal niet gedronken. Want ik dacht, ik heb de Dry January, dat bevalt me eigenlijk uitstekend. Dus ik heb al dagen geen druppel op. Maar nu dacht ik nou...
Droge wijn, hoor, dit is
is droog. Ja.
Mooi om
dat is het. Dry January is dat je droge witte wijn drinkt.
Droge witte wijn,
Jongens, gezondheid ook voor jullie thuiskijkers. We zijn dus live de komende avond. Laat ons vooral weten als je iets wil vragen of zeggen. Superchats kunnen hier binnenkomen. Ik zie ze nu nog niet op het scherm, zeg ik even tegen de techniek. Maar als ze binnenkomen, laat ze dan vooral zien. En kom ermee door. Paul, jij bent ook op vakantie geweest? Rome?
Ja, ik ben vier nachten in Rome geweest. Het was heerlijk weer. Het was echt, je kon echt buiten zitten. En die Italianen die trekken zich allemaal niks aan van wat er allemaal niet meer mag. Dus je hebt die vuurtjes buiten staan, of hoe heet dat? Die verwarmers allemaal buiten. En dan kon je lekker op het terras zitten. Dus het was heerlijk. Ja, en ik heb het Vaticaans Museum bekeken. Ik heb stilgestaan bij de school van Athene, van Raphaël. Kennen jullie dat? Ja.
Ik heb wel een beetje een beeld, ja.
Het is een geweldige wand dus, beschilderd door Raphaël, waar alle grote filosofen uit de Griekse oudheid op afgebeeld staan. Met in het midden Plato en Aristoteles. Plato met zijn hand omhoog, wijzend naar het ideeënrijk. Aristoteles, die hem een beetje tot wat meer aardse overpeinzingen aanmaant. En om hem heen alle scholen, dus de sceptici, Diogenes op de trap, Diogenes van de ton. En dus ik heb lekker filosofiecollege gegeven aan mijn dochter en aan mijn vrouw. Dus het was erg leuk. Over al die figuren dus.
Werd dat gewaardeerd ook, of niet?
Leuk. Ja, ze luisteren heel beleefd, ja, moet ik zeggen. Ja, of ze het waarderen, dat moet je ze nog maar eens een keer vragen als ik er niet bij ben. Maar het was...
wat leuk om met je vrouw en dochter daar te zijn, man.
Heerlijk. Ja.
En dat beetje dwalen door het Vaticaans Museum.
Ja, geweldig. En ook die mix dus
nog
van...
tunnelcomplexen tegengekomen? Of andere...
Nee. Dat was allemaal heel relaxed. En ook geweldige kunst ook gezien, ja. In Villa Borghese natuurlijk. Dat was ook echt heel bekend. Eigenlijk prachtig. Waar je heel dicht bij de kunstwerken ook kunt komen. Hè. Dat is heel mooi. En dat was Nou, niet te veel mensen ook. Het was ook niet zo krankzinnig druk. Dus dat was een heerlijke dag. Dus ik ben helemaal weer verkwikt.
Mooi man. Ja, en ik ben niet weg geweest. Ik heb alleen maar gewerkt eigenlijk de afgelopen tijd. Maar en jij, ben jij weg geweest?
Nee, ik ben in de stad gebleven.
Ja, maar je moest natuurlijk ook goed opletten. Want voor je het weet is die Halsema opnieuw voor... hoeveel jaar wordt de burgemeester eigenlijk benoemd? 5?
Voor 6 jaar.
6.
Ja, dat is een flink aantal jaren. Dat was wel eigenlijk leuk. Zo gaat dat vaker in de politiek van... Ja, andere partijen nemen je eigen ideeën over. Ik heb dus een groot punt gemaakt van het vertrouwensverlies... tussen burger, erfpachter onder meer... en de stedelijke overheid. En dat heeft ze op een gegeven moment toch wel omarmd. En nu, wie schetst onze verbazing in die herbenoemingsbrief... waarin ze zich kandideert richting de gemeenteraad... heeft ze dit tot haar 4e grote speerpunt verklaard. Dus dat is wel leuk.
Ja,
waarom niet?
Ja.
Neem het over. Dat doen wij toch ook wel eens. De andere politieke partijen die iets zinnigs zeggen, kan je dat
die enkele keer dat
omarmen.
Gebeurt, ja, hoe vaak ik heb dat zelf nog niet meegemaakt, maar we zijn er niet principieel op tegen, zullen we maar zeggen, om iets over te nemen van anderen. Wat is er nou eigenlijk aan de hand in Duitsland, jongens?
Ja.
Wat is daar nou aan de hand met die boeren? Wij hebben het namelijk, de reden dat ik dit zo sceptisch zeg, is het volgende. Vorig jaar, en dit is een van mijn lessen in de politiek geweest, denk ik. Dat zie je elke keer als een soort stier, weet je wel, zo'n lap voorhouden van, nu gaan ze pakken. Weet je, nu gaat het gebeuren. De gele hesjes in Frankrijk, weet je wel, week in, week uit, iedereen van, in Frankrijk begint de revolutie. Ja. En toen in Nederland, met al die vlaggen om ze erboven, de Dutch farmers, allemaal eens Amerikaanse journalisten, die kwamen naar Nederland toe, van, maar de Dutch are resistance fighters. Nou, nooit meer iets van genomen, weet je wel.
Canadese truckers
De Canadese truckers, ja, die hebben we ook gehad. Verdomd.
Gigantisch. Ja.
En dan nu in Duitsland. En in mijn voorspelling is, weet je, dit duurt 2 weken. En dan 3 weken. Op een gegeven moment die boeren denken, ja, kut, ik moet ook mijn oogst toch van het land halen. Huh? Die aardappelen, die moeten toch op een gegeven moment de grond uit.
Ja,
en dan...
denk ik. De speculeren, no one knows.
De politiek gaat een beetje...
Ik kan ook niet helemaal de vinger erachter hoe groot het nou precies is. Hè? Dus de NPO die maakt het klein. En dan zie je al die mensen die dingen publiceren op internet en zo. Die maken het heel groot. Maar het is echt moeilijk om daar zicht op te krijgen op de omvang. En de duur natuurlijk al helemaal niet. Dat zal moeten gaan blijken.
Het is wel op veel plaatsen tegelijk. Hè? Dat is het grote verschil wat we hier zagen. Hier trokken ze op naar Den Haag.
Wat ze überhaupt willen, die boeren in Duitsland?
Ja, hun subsidies voor diesel en zo, die worden afgebouwd. Dus hun kosten worden hoger.
Ja, dus daar gaat het over.
Daar gaat het
dus
om,
het is een
de
beetje geld. Maar het is dus niet, want dat vind ik altijd zo irritant, zeg maar, dat het gepresenteerd wordt als van, kijk... Weet je wel, de Duitse boeren komen in opstand tegen de oorlog in Oekraïne of zo. Ze zijn nu helemaal zat dat het World Economic Forum ons een chip wil geven.
Ja, door wie geframed?
Nee,
door wie geframed? Ik bedoel, iedereen...
Je ziet toch allemaal van die... Nee. Je ziet maar onze beweging, die neemt dit zo over zo... Van, kijk, zo breed als Joost Niemuller en Tucker Carlson.
Even Vlaardingenbroek niet te vergeten.
En Reisa Blommestein en Sietske Bergsma is daar om er verslag van te doen. En het is natuurlijk leuk om er verslag van te doen. Dat gaat niet doen, maar het wordt gepresenteerd alsof dit is allemaal dezelfde beweging. Maar die boeren willen gewoon dat hun subsidies in stand blijven. Zijn zij ook tegen ze gehoord worden? Ja. Maar zijn ze ook tegen de klimaatmaatregelen?
Genomen.
Zijn ze tegen massa-immigratie?
I don't know.
Geen idee. Maar, is er een leider?
Ja,
hebben ze een plan? Hebben ze een politieke partij?
Het gaat een beetje ongehoord. Maar
het is gewoon vuige ruzie om subsidies, man.
Ja.
Ja, het is iets meer dan dat volgens mij. Maar het is een soort ongenoegen. Dat had natuurlijk die gele hesjes ook. Dat was ook heel breed.
Ja.
En dat is eigenlijk alleen maar gesmoord doordat toen corona kwam. Hè? Want dat was wel een vrij grote beweging toen. Ja. Tegen Macron. Macron die wankelde ook op dat moment. Ja, volgens mij wel. Die durfde op een aantal plaatsen niet meer te komen, weet je dat nog? Werd hij in een theater uitgejaagd en zo. Dat was toen wel heel heftig.
Ja, ik krijg een klap van piloten.
Ja, er was toen van alles aan de hand. En dat is na corona is het natuurlijk helemaal gesmoord.
Ja.
Zijn mensen even boos. Ja.
Maar dat was... Nee, oké, maar dat was in ieder geval breder. En dit is volgens mij ook wel wat breder dan alleen maar de subsidie voor de diesel. Maar of het een soort FVD-achtig gebeuren is, weet ik niet. De AFD is overigens wel inmiddels meer dan 25%, volgens de peilingen. Dat is best groot.
Tuurlijk.
Dat is belangrijk, ja.
Maar ook weer niet. Ja, het is ongeveer de maat van Wilders nu hè, in Nederland.
Ja.
Dus dat is groot, maar ja...
Wat is jullie inschatting van de formatie eigenlijk, Anton? Heb jij daar een beeld bij?
Nou, ik denk dat men zich heeft vastgepraat, vooral de VVD. Hè, we zeggen, we willen het wel misschien gedogen. Dat lijkt mij vanuit de VVD gezien, ja, wat zeg ik daarvan, niet zo verstandig. Want als je dus mensen in het kabinet hebt, dan kan je toch, er komen altijd nieuwe dingen voorbij. Dan heb je zit je een beetje aan de knoppen. Hè? VVD'ers willen altijd aan de knoppen zitten. Dat is heel interessant. En dus daar ziet men dan nu klaarblijkelijk van af. We gaan zien of het mogelijk is of ze een zwenking maakt. Even kijken, voor Omtzigt lijkt me heel lastig om wel met PVV en BBB samen te gaan werken, in een kabinet zitten. En dan zonder de VVD. Dus Omtzigt zegt, en dat begrijp ik eigenlijk wel, dus in beginsel niet, als de VVD ook niet meedoet in het kabinet.
Ja, ik denk dat het heel interessant gaat bewijzen wat wij al die tijd zeggen. Namelijk dat je niet via de politiek dingen kunt veranderen. Je kunt alleen via de politiek aandacht vragen voor wat je moet veranderen. Maar de verandering kan alleen maar vanuit de samenleving komen. Want ofwel de onderhandelingen klappen. En dan is dus bewezen dat strategisch stemmen geen zin heeft. Dat het ook als je 37 zetels hebt, dat je helemaal niks kan veranderen. Of Wilders moet op alle punten alles inleveren. En dan is dus bewezen dat je te maken hebt met een kartel opnieuw. Wat wij dus ook steeds zeggen. Waar je helemaal niet tussen... Want ze gaan niet instemmen met stoppen met klimaatafspraken. Want die zijn in Parijs een internationaal VN-verband afgestemd. EU gaan we niet uit. Er komt geen Nexit-referendum. Er komt geen referendum over de euro.
Nee, denk ik ook.
Vluchtelingen, immigratie. Ja, misschien marginaal. Een heel klein pieterpeuterig beetje. En dat wordt dan natuurlijk in de pers gepresenteerd als een radicale immigratieagenda doorgedrukt of zo. Maar dat gaat helemaal niks fundamenteel veranderen. Bovendien, over 4 jaar komt er een andere Pipo de Clown daar. En die zet weer wagenwijd de grenzen open. Dus ook dat zal geen effect hebben. Met andere woorden... NAVO, Wilders steunt dat inmiddels. Hij heeft gezegd dat hij voor de onvoorwaardelijke soevereiniteit van Oekraïne is. Waarmee hij dus zegt dat de Krim terug moet naar Oekraïne. En dat gaat Rusland nooit doen. Nee. Rusland laat nog liever Moskou van de aardbodem verdwijnen dan als ze ooit de Krim zullen opgeven. Dus dat is gewoon een oorlogsverklaring aan Rusland. Dus daar is hij ook helemaal in de pas gaan lopen. Nou, dat hij Israël belangrijker vindt dan Nederland, dat weet iedereen al heel lang. Dus hij over het Midden-Oosten zal ook niet veel veranderen. In de positie van Nederland daarin of de NAVO. Dus ja, het is
nou, ik vind
helemaal niks.
Ik vind het wel interessant, want zoals ik het zie, zijn de spelers nu, die 4 spelers die met z'n 4 bezig zijn, die zijn op de VVD na, zijn die allemaal totaal ongecontroleerd. Je hebt PVV is in feite alleen Wilders. Die laat zich wat adviseren. Ja. Zo. Er zit verder geen achterban achter die allerlei richting aangeeft. Dus heeft Wilders zin om te regeren of niet? Want er zitten allerlei complicaties aan. Ik weet het niet, maar dat is in ieder geval een ongeplande speler. Hetzelfde geldt voor Omtzigt. Wat wil die man precies? Wat wil zijn achterban precies? Weet je ook helemaal niet. Dat is ook een Einzelganger. En heb je BBB verder ook natuurlijk... Ja, die hebben veel zetels in de Eerste Kamer. De Tweede Kamer zijn natuurlijk best klein. En, dus je hebt allemaal spelers. De enige normale partij, bij wijze van spreken, is de VVD. Maar daar zijn de belangrijke kopstukken weg. Dus je hebt een spel met allemaal aangeslagen spelers, zou ik maar zeggen. Ja. En dat geeft volgens mij wel mogelijkheden om iets geks te gaan doen. Bijvoorbeeld een buitenparlementair kabinet. Of iets van een minderheidskabinet. Of in ieder geval een structuur waarbij de Tweede Kamer weer iets meer zijn oude rol kan pakken. Daar hoop ik eigenlijk een beetje op. Dat er zoiets gaat ontstaan. Ja, dat is nog steeds een marginale stap voorwaarts. Maar in ieder geval, want ik kan me niet voorstellen dat je in zo'n constellatie een normaal regeerakkoord kan maken. Dat kan nooit.
normaal
Ja.
regeerakkoord.
Ja,
We
misschien
willen
zullen ze
juist
het niet
af
doen.
van die...
Nee, maar wat er normaal gevonden werd tot nu toe, daar ben ik ook tegen. Maar dat
Ja.
is in deze constellatie ook niet goed denkbaar. Dus ik hoop toch dat er door deze gekkigheid iets ontstaat, waardoor er wat meer Thorbeckiaanse ruimte komt, zou ik maar zeggen, in dat gebeuren.
Ja, maar dat zou toch misschien ook wel kunnen. Kijk, in die zin dat als er nou niet te veel spijkerharde afspraken worden gemaakt, en op een gegeven moment worden die ministeries die worden verdeeld en die krijgen ministers, dan krijgen misschien die ministers ietsje meer vrijheid. Hè? En dan moeten ze een beetje naar elkaar gaan zitten kijken van wat wordt er nog toegelaten. Dat is op zichzelf toch niet ondenkbaar. Als je een goede premier hebt die dat allemaal een beetje in goede banen leidt. En misschien denkt Wilders wel dat hij dan ook weer de kans krijgt om een aantal dingen, wat erg gevreesd wordt, uit de ijskast te gaan halen. Hij is nu heel veel in die ijskast aan het doen. Dus Oekraïne erin en zijn islamstandpunten erin. Vrijheid van meningsuiting. Hij levert allerlei dingen in om goodwill te kweken. En op een gegeven moment, als je dan zo'n nieuw kabinet hebt, dan ga je eens kijken. Dan moeten maar eens gaan kijken. Ik bedoel,
Maar ik vind het in ieder geval heel ongewis.
Ze
En
moeten
daardoor
wel
wel
doorgaan.
spannend. Het is leuker dan het ooit geweest.
Minister-president Plasterk.
Je moet wel in de microfoon blijven praten.
Lijkt me leuk.
Ronald.
Ja,
Nou.
dat is prima hoor. Ja.
Ik weet niet of hij als minister het goed gedaan weet ik eigenlijk niet.
Ja,
Hij heeft niet
niet
veel
slecht.
gedaan.
Nou, hij heeft de Europese
goed.
grondwet aangenomen, terwijl die eerst voor het referendum daarover
nou,
was
dat
en
heb ik
toen
nog-
tegen gestemd heeft.
Hij en Rauwvoet.
Wat heeft hij toen nog meer gedaan?
Nou, daar heb ik inderdaad toch steeds wel een beetje pijn van, ja.
Hij heeft Omroep Poont heeft hij in het leven
Ja.
geroepen. Dat was wel goed.
Nou, dat is al heel wat.
Ja.
Maar verder, verder heeft hij natuurlijk niet zoveel gedaan. Maar hij is altijd een ontzettende lastpost geweest voor de PvdA. Wat op zichzelf ook wel een verdienste is, vind ik. Hè?
Ja.
Toch? Dat is, hij is echt zijn hele carrière is hij lid gebleven van de PvdA. Hij heeft eigenlijk nooit iets gedaan wat in die agenda paste. Dat was
Guest
al.
of honor.
Dat was toen we columnisten waren bij Buitenhof, waar je het net over had.
Ja.
Wij altijd, hij zei altijd van die dingen die gingen allemaal helemaal lijnrecht tegen de PvdA. En ja, het was wel leuk, maar die opvattingen heeft hij ook niet van de laatste tijd. Die heeft hij eigenlijk altijd gehad.
En toch bij de PvdA gebleven. En ik vond zijn uitspraak erg leuk. Zo van, er is altijd weer een beter moment om je lidmaatschap op te zeggen.
Hij wilde wachten op het allerbeste moment
Ja.
en dat kwam maar niet. Hey jongens, we gaan beginnen met ons hoofdonderwerp. Dat is het World Economic Forum. Dat begint morgen. En John Lochland is hier ook. John, schuif lekker aan. John,
Hi John.
jouw Nederlands is behoorlijk verbeterd afgelopen jaar. John Lochland werkt al ruim 1,5 jaar voor Forum for Democracy International. Dat doet hij fantastisch. Daar is hij enorm bezig een internationaal netwerk op te zetten. Dat is heel belangrijk. En je bent bezig Nederlands te leren. Maar jouw Nederlands is nog niet zo goed dat je nog niet, maar we zijn het aan het bijschaven. De bedoeling is wel dat we het in de toekomst, dat we dit ook in het Nederlands kunnen doen. Maar misschien kan je een paar dingen in het Nederlands heel kort zeggen, dat mensen begrijpen dat ik niet alleen maar een geintje aan het maken ben, maar dat je het echt een beetje volgt. Terwijl Ralf jou misschien een wijntje inschenkt. Je bent iets te laat omdat de trein vertraagd was. Je kwam uit Parijs vanochtend.
Yes,
En,
just arrived.
maar je begrijpt Nederlands. Het passief begrip van Nederland is goed. Maar we hebben toch besloten dat we dit verder in het Engels gaan doen. Want dat is wel zo leuk.
Cheerio.
Wij zeggen proost.
Sorry to impose English.
We'll switch to English. Also for the live stream, questions can from now on be asked in English as well. The super chat questions, they'll be projected on the screen behind the cameras here so we can all see them and respond to them. We're going to talk about the World Economic Forum, the meeting in Davos that's going to start tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Ticket prices start at 28,000 per participant.
Oh.
And they become higher. You have to pay more if you want to be included in more exclusive sessions and dinners and everything. And I think it's very important, first of all, to realize that when the Forum for Democracy started talking about this, roughly over 2 years ago, it was absolutely anathema. It was unheard of for the people in the Netherlands to talk about this. It was a sort of weird thing that it was just a place where people come together and have a chat, a praatclub.
Yeah.
Like Bilderberg, you know.
We're just having a drink. You know, it's nothing really. And the interesting thing was also that we started asking questions in Parliament. Okay, so why is the Prime Minister going there? What's he going to discuss? What's his mandate?
And
right?
who's paying him?
And then the answer was, that's the interesting thing, precisely as you're saying, Anton. He's going in his capacity as a private citizen.
Amazing.
Okay, he's a private citizen. But why is he using the government private jet? Why does he wear a badge which says Prime Minister of the Netherlands rather than Mark Rutte, private citizen, you know, of The Hague or whatever?
Paid for myself.
Paid for myself with his EasyJet ticket or something. No. He went. So it's clearly that they're going there in their capacity as members of cabinet, members of the government, and they're giving speeches in their capacity as members of the government. And we were the first to address this theme in the Netherlands. And John, the reason that I really wanted to have you on this panel discussion this evening, and I think all our viewers are really excited that you're here, is that you have been studying the World Economic Forum for many years. And I think it would be wonderful to open the discussion simply by a short expose. Well, if you could just give a short introduction. What's the World Economic Forum? Why is it based in Switzerland? Who is Klaus Schwab? And why is it called Economic Forum? What's going on there?
Well, it's true. I wrote a little.
And please speak.
I wrote a little
close in
book
the
about it.
microphone.
I wrote a little book about it a couple of years ago in French. It was founded in 1973, the same year as the Trilateral Commission, as it happens, but not at first anyway. With a similar declared political goal like Bilderberg or the Trilateral Commission. The goals have only become clearer over time. Bilderberg was set up by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands to strengthen transatlantic relations. The Trilateral Commission was set up to strengthen the leadership of the developed world over the underdeveloped world and to manage this increasingly chaotic, decolonized world. Japan was part of it, absolutely. Yeah. That's the three corners of the Trilateral Commission. Davos's history is the origins are a little different. It was, you asked why it's based in Switzerland. It's because Klaus Schwab is a professor of management at a university in Geneva, or was anyway. That's where he began his career. And he set the forum up in 1973 under the then name of the European Management Forum. It wasn't originally called World Economic Forum. And it brought together managers, obviously, but also heads of, or at least senior political figures. And the whole ethos of it is to blend and indeed destroy the distinction between public and private, between state power and private power. That's why what you've just said about Mark Rutte is extremely revelatory. Yeah. Because the whole ethos of it, the whole philosophy of it, the whole nonsense about stakeholder capitalism, which is one of Schwab's slogans, is that there should indeed be so companies should become like governments. They should practice good governance. They're given marks according to their environmental, social, and governance standards. So companies are evaluated according to according to standards that normally you would expect to be applied to a government. And governments are evaluated according to the services that they provide to their citizens, as if they were service providers in the private sphere. So the whole idea is to break down the distinction between public and private. In other words, to break down the conceptual definition of the state, because in the world of Davos, the states have no particular function other than that's any substantially different from private companies. Above all, they are, of course, paying the tickets. Above all, states are ultimately an obstacle, really, to Davos's quite clearly globalist vision.
Well, they're management entities.
Globalist because it is inspired by a managerial ethic. It is the embodiment of the managerial revolution of James Burnham. And by managerial revolution, I mean the idea that governments are indeed like enterprises, that they fix goals, that they treat their citizens as resources. We have this horrible phrase, human resources, and that they should indeed, or at least it's true of companies anyway. One of the most striking things, of course, about the corporate world, Ralph knows this better than I do, is that the corporate world is obsessively hierarchical, isn't it? It's a whole structure. You know, the whole stuff about free market is a bit of a joke, because we all know that big companies, the whole sort of pecking order, the perks, the executive, you know, the bigger office, the bigger car, all the rest of it. These are hierarchical structures. They are hierarchical command structures, and that is the Davos model for the global government. It's a hierarchical command structure designed to produce certain outcomes, just as the boss of a company is there to produce.
And what's wrong with that, John?
What's wrong with it is that that's not what states or societies are. States are not artificially created entities which exist for the purpose of goals external to themselves. States are, on the contrary, natural entities that have grown up over time and which have their own logic and indeed their own, they contain their own end in themselves. You know, a state exists it's not I don't mean to say that the state is its own justification, but states and the societies on which they are based are what give our lives meaning. They are linguistic entities, they're geographical entities, they are historical entities, they're legal entities.
Sovereign entities.
And we hope that they are sovereign entities.
Yes.
Totally different.
So they are
animals.
not, they are in every respect different from a company.
Let's rewind this a little bit, because we've been going quite fast here. So 1973, in the Netherlands, we had the beginnings of the cabinet of Den Uyl. It was quite a left-wing cabinet, P van de A. Den Uyl, 1973, 1977, linkse tijd. We had the oil crisis. We had just had the Yom Kippur War. We're just going to have the Yom Kippur War later that year. So it's the middle of the Cold War. And Klaus Schwab, who had been a student of Henry Kissinger's at Harvard School of... What's it? Business school, I think. Yes,
Of government.
School of Government, maybe. In the United States, had been asked, basically by Arthur Schlesinger, wasn't it?
Well, I don't know.
As well as Henry Kissinger, and also a third man whose name has just escaped me, but we'll come back in a second, who were three people who were very involved in the American foreign policy and American big businesses and so on, to set up a network of government organizations and corporations in Switzerland to make it easier to ring someone up in Europe, right?
Yeah.
That had been Kissinger's long famous complaint. If I want to speak to Europe, there's no one I can call, right? That's what he used to say.
But my feeling is that I mean, I didn't know about Schlesinger and Kissinger, about their involvement.
Schwab was Kissinger's student.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But he's an engineer and an economist, Schwab.
Yes, and
it's very much focused on, you know, the means and then the ends, which you set, the objectives, and say that constitutional constraints or ethical considerations or historical, what historically has grown, that is very relevant.
Is he a thinker? Does he have ideas?
Well, no.
I think he's just some guy.
I think he's
They were looking for some
stupid.
guy.
I think he's unbelievably the
Yeah,
level. I don't know if vain, very limited. I don't know if you've ever attended or been anywhere near a business school, but I find them absolutely unbearable. I've been to INSEAD a few times, and I can hardly breathe when I'm in there. It's so disgusting. Everything about it, politics. The ethic. no, it's much worse.
Is it worse than politics? Wow.
And Schwab is very much from that mold. You know, essentially a lot of. Management speak, in other words, what we would call langue de bois, wooden language, but worse than political wooden language. But all dressed up as incredibly clever, and he brings in these various gurus like the Israeli guy Yuval Hariri and other people, and they get off on crazy stuff about transhumanism and how you're going to have a chip implanted in your brain and you'll have a robot as your butler and so on.
No, but it's on the surface. I think it's all sounds very logical, and it's an extension of applying simple logic to the most efficient way of governing an entity, be it the government or be it...
No, but I think we're going too fast because we're talking about the abstract ideas of someone who doesn't have abstract ideas. He's just the organizer. And I think it's important to see the development of the World Economic Forum, the European Management Forum, from 1973 onwards, because the very first meeting, you know who were the opening speakers of the very first meeting of what's now the World Economic Forum?
Otto von Habsburg was one of them.
Okay, so what do we know from Otto von Habsburg? He was in favor of a United States of Europe.
Absolutely.
He was also a multiculturalist.
Totally.
And he was an environmentalist. Henry Kissinger, opening speaker, obviously, because he had been Schwab's mentor. But also, who were the other guys? The authors of Limits to Growth, the report, famous report of the Club of Rome. So this was, and that's the starting point of the milieubeweging, as we say in Dutch, the environmentalist cause, the environmentalist movement. And that's what it started with. So, and ever since, you see that they've been talking about the main trends, what they wanted to be the main trends in European and Western political life. And I think the important thing to understand is that the people behind Schwab were using this platform with their fame and their impressive international status. So all these European business leaders and government officials, they were very excited to be in a dinner with Henry Kissinger. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Okay, so they came there. They went to this place. And all they had to do was to sit in and listen to the things that Kissinger wanted them to listen to.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing about everything that happens, because I was there last year in Davos. They do not have debates with for and against. That's not the format. They have panel discussions where they discuss problems. So it's consensus driven.
That's right.
The aim is not to have proposition and then
it's a kind of it's a parliament. It's a parliament in a one-party state, basically.
Yes.
Under dictatorship, you have a
Yes.
parliament, but
Yes.
but the parliament all thinks the same, and it's just that kind of parliament is basically that's working now under the World Economic Forum, and what's against it, in my point, that it's against democracy, and what we pretend to have is a democratic system based on the Dutch Constitution. Article 42 of the Dutch Constitution says the king is inviolable and the ministers are responsible. So the ministers should be able to control everything, basically, and we, the people, assembled in parliament, should be able to control the ministers. What we have here is a system where people who are rich and famous, movie stars, Leonardo DiCaprio, King Charles, our Maxima, Queen Maxima. It's an assembly of people. Of rich and the famous and Bono and they like to see each other, and there is a basic consensus on the direction, and that's basically that's the definition of
that it's very pragmatist and managerial.
It's oligarchy.
Big
is the
business.
or plutocracy.
Yeah, exactly. Or
Is there a
plutocracy,
word
yes.
for a combination of the rich and the famous? So the rich, that's of course the plutocracy,
Yeah.
but the famous, the glitterati, the people, or it's crazy, and it's crazy that we pay so much money also to our leaders, our ministers, to go there, so-called to be educated, but it's all
And to be
endless repetition of the same
coordinated.
ideological
The
message.
political class has lost its feeling for what is a society, where should we be heading to.
Yes.
They have no clue.
No.
And then then this World Economic Forum is interesting and maybe useful because that forum has, with all its thinkers, a lot of ideas. And my goodness, that is interesting. And then they embrace these ideas. That's like a flock of sparrows. You know, they all go in one same managerial direction.
But it's always been that way.
And there are lots of
The world has always been like that.
But there's the difference with an ordinary parliament. There, the people, the variety of viewpoints that you have in Dutch society is, if it's okay, reflected in the parliament. So you have Christians and you have atheists and you have people from the right and you have people from the left. And then in the clash of opinions, if it all functions according to the ideals that we have of a democracy, then the truth can arise. That's the idea. But here, those people who go there have already found the truth, and they meet other people who are of the same convictions.
And they don't like the clash of ideas. That's what
they regard that as a managerial problem. That's
exactly. And they regard the clash of ideas as dangerous. In fact, in Schwab's videos, he's always talking about the danger of populism, like all the centre left.
No, but that's also perhaps because they understand their. I'm playing devil's advocate here, but it might also be because they understand their position in the hierarchy between. We have scientists, right? Who they establish what's necessary, and then it's up to management layers, governmental layers, and business leaders to make it work. Right? We know that climate change is real. We know we must do something about migrational flows that are happening. Yeah. We know that Russia's behavior in Ukraine is unacceptable because the pundits have told us so, because scientists have told us so. I think that's very much what they believe.
And very unscientific, of course.
Indeed.
It's, obviously. Yeah,
but I do get the impression that they are nervous. I think I don't think things are going particularly well for Davos Man. Davos Man, I think it was Huntington who
they want to
coined the expression
re-establish trust now.
Yes, exactly. Re-establish trust, which means there isn't trust.
Anymore,
exactly. And of course, this forum is devoted to disinformation, the fight against disinformation having become completely totalitarian now. There are many, many examples of this. Only a day or two ago, a British man who lives in Ukraine, in the Donbass, he'd been sanctioned by the British Foreign Secretary. When I say sanctioned, his bank account was frozen. He couldn't pay any bills. He has a property in Britain. Punished, in other words. No trial, no defence, no due process. Just an executive decision. Right. And it went to he took it to the High Court, and the High Court found in favour of the government. So the judicial system has, as ever, sided with the government. But I mention that just because it's an example of how this whole fight against disinformation has become totally totalitarian, if I may put it that way, more and more aggressive, and that's why. And they're devoting this year's World Economic Forum to that issue because they are obsessed with controlling the narrative. It's the absolute obsession of global. We've seen it in Poland. What is the first action of the new European government, Euro government in Poland? It's to send the police in to arrest all the broadcasters in the public television because just as the European Commission's first reaction to the invasion of Ukraine was to ban RT and Sputnik, because the narrative is like, I mean, it's in any banana republic, in any Latin American dictatorship. What do the colonels do? They take control of the radio station. That's the first thing you do.
But Ralph, you were of course a top manager at the Rabobank for several years. Have you been to Davos?
No, my colleagues went there. But I was more of an internal guy, so I didn't have a reason to go there.
Only to ski, maybe.
Well, I did go there, but not to the World Economic Forum. No, but the point I want to make is that it's not so much that it's evil what they're doing there. I think it's the reduction of the complexity of the world into a managerial problem, and that's why it's a bit counterintuitive when you're against that. Because many Dutch people also see the Netherlands as the BV Nederland, so Netherlands Incorporated. So you simulate a country being a corporation, and it needs to be managed properly, and there's profit and loss and all that sort of thing. so the parallels are very good, very well understood by the public. So our criticism is in many cases it's poorly understood because people say, yeah, but democracy is chaotic. I remember the time when we said, why don't we have a system like France, where you have a president who's 2 times 7 years in a row president. So you have 14 years. And then at last you can build a whole network of TGV or nuclear stations, you know. That and in our system it never works because after 2-3 years the cabinet falls again and it's messy. Why don't we have a better governance? That's what a lot of people say, and hence the whole idea of approaching governments as if they were a complex system of corporations does appeal to people. And I think it's a deeply philosophical point to say it's exactly the key point of life itself, of society itself, that it's not an efficient machine. Yeah. And that's exactly the charm of it. But that is not something you bring across just like that. It's rather complex because it sounds pretty, let's say, convinced.
Well, it's full of promise, isn't it? Because promise anything. You promise that you'll have higher living standards. You promise that the goals will be achieved.
I mean, you have a goal, you have a plan,
exactly, and it appeals. It's what Raymond Aron and others have said. That's why socialism appeals to intellectuals. That's why intellectuals are, by definition, left wing because socialism gives them power or appears to give them power.
Yeah, de maakbaarheid van de samenleving, as we call it.
If I may,
of course.
But what I don't understand is that people don't see the constitutional problems of this whole process. I mean, it's so we're talking now the 4 parties who are talking now about the next government. They are talking about the grondwet, the Dutch constitution. What does it mean? And did Geert Wilders not say something that's contradictory to the constitution? It's like the constitution is a kind of a holy book. And what do they do here? People, countries, they send their kings. Or Queen Maxima is there, King Charles. Yeah. He is simply chatting in a 19th century way about politics. That was unheard of. It's direct.
Why exactly, Paul? Why is that so?
Because it's in our constitution. The king does not enter into politics. The king is inviolable. He does not do the politics. It's not important what to think.
Well, is that true?
Of course, it's in the Constitution, Article 42.
No, it only says that he's inviolable. He's onschendbaar. It doesn't say that he only has a ceremonial role.
No, he is onschendbaar in the sense you are not supposed to criticize the king. Yeah. And and the king is not supposed to enter into all kind of political argument.
Where do you find that? Where do you find that?
In the handbooks of constitutional law.
But not in the Constitution itself. It doesn't say that.
No, that's implied. That's the.
Is it? The king is also the president of the Raad van State. He has his weekly private conversation with the prime minister. He has his advisory role with regards to the formation of cabinets. He has all this influence. I think it's.
But I think the inviolability is surely simply the expression of the sovereignty of the state. The state can't take itself to court, so that's why the king is inviolable. But there is, in the Netherlands, as incidentally also in Britain, a very long tradition that the king does not get involved in politics. No. And in both countries, that tradition has now been thrown out of the dustbin of history.
With King Charles, he sets a terrible example for our king. Yes. And it's going to happen. Yes. Now it's the Queen who's going. In a sense, but another 2 years, and the king will go. Yeah,
I think what they'll say, and the reason that I'm being devil's advocate because I think it's very important to get our argument very, very straightforward and very, very pure. They will say, look, we are just engaging with the movers and shakers in the world. This is our chance to talk with Larry Fink from BlackRock. This is our chance to see Bill Gates. Yeah. And we are ambassadors of the Netherlands in many respects. when I visited, I visited China once in a certain capacity, and working for a university, and I was received by the Dutch embassy there in Beijing, and they said, "Oh, we just had the king last week, and he was meeting with business leaders." That's the job of the royal family in many respects. They have this ambassador-like role, and that's also what. Again, the devil's advocate will say, defending the.
No, I think they'll say something. I think they'll say. I think the kings, Willem and Charles, would say slightly different things. They might say that, but they would also, I think, say that what they're doing is not politics. They would say that when they're campaigning, for example, on green issues, which of course is Charles's big thing, that's not politics.
No,
and that is part of the unpolitical philosophy, the unpolitical mentality, which lies at the absolute root of Davos, the unpolitical mentality whose philosophical origins lie, I'm convinced, with the positivists of Saint-Simon, the early 19th century French positivists, because they quite explicitly wanted a world governed by industrialists. They thought that industrialists understood the science. Exactly. Auguste Comte, Augustin Thierry, all those people.
Yeah, right.
They wanted the world to be governed by industrialists because industrialists, you mentioned science, industrialists understood the science of production.
Technocracy.
The technocracy. There was explicitly technocratic. And later on, that idea, which has never gone away and has just gone from generation to generation, would be taken up in the latter part of the 19th century by people who were obsessed with law instead of science. It became, the new certainty became law. And in all these cases, both with the positivists and later on with the international lawyers, the idea was to make politics disappear.
Go away.
Exactly. You have to, because politics is arbitrary choice. There's a quotation from, I think it's Auguste Comte, it's one of them, who says, we want to get rid of theological sovereignty, so the divine right of kings, and also popular sovereignty. He puts the two on the same level, because both of them are arbitrary and not scientific. And we, the positivists, want science. We don't want arbitrary choice. And that is the mentality of Davos today. An election, if it throws up the wrong result, is an arbitrary, irrational choice and has to be countered by the managers and the scientists.
If we introduce some labels to perhaps said that, so it's on the one hand plutocracy, so government by the rich, then it's also bureaucracy, people in not elected people, but civil servants. Then you have there's also a kind of people. What is it? The famous people, DiCaprio. What's his contribution?
What is the Greek word for fame? I'm not sure what it is.
No, but think about it. There's Leonardo DiCaprio, Bono.
Yeah.
I do not even like his music. What does he have to do there? What kind of?
Well, because he is a voice of influence, rather like the heads of certain newspapers, media outlets. I think they're just.
But why he and why not someone else?
Well, again, it's the
Well,
narrative.
that's
It's communication. It's the narrative. So you put someone like Bono or Leonardo DiCaprio, and you. Or
but they all
Sean Penn or any of these
invite like-minded
or Angelina
people.
Jolie.
So Kanye West is unlikely to
Absolutely.
in Davos.
Certainly, Clint Eastwood not very likely to be invited.
Yeah, the oligarchs that support Vladimir Putin are unlikely to be invited in Davos. So they pick, and that's the thing that I think is perhaps the most important point to get to. That's why I've been playing devil's advocate. The invitational. The list of invitees is the most interesting thing, and what we should be, I think, working on is to make a list of people that have not been invited but equally qualify in terms of fame, in terms of richness, in terms of influence, and then show, because that's the hidden hand behind. Because what this is the fabrication of consent. Yeah. This is the impression of consent, the manufacturing of the suggestion of consent. That's the very point of Davos, that all these people return to their respective offices or national governments or wherever they're from, and they will say, "Look, we've just been chatting with all these people. Everybody agrees with this.
This is the definition of the situation.
Yes.
Point.
Yeah. And we've been talking with this guy and that superstar with this dinner with me. He was also on the same page." And that's, but the funny thing, of course, and the great thing about this Ukraine war is that Putin is violently showing the world there is no such thing as consent. There is no inevitable direction that we're moving in.
And Russia was disinvited in
totally.
last year.
That's precisely my point. That's the thing. So at the moment somebody breaks out of this consensus and a real debate would start, then you're just off the chart.
Putin gave a very good speech. Xi Jinping and Putin spoke in 2021, and Putin said, I remember it quite clearly, I think I've watched it live, gave a speech about the world economy, about the casino capitalism, about the accumulation of debt and how it was all going to end in tears and so on. He gave a very good denunciation, really, of the way the West functions. And indeed was politely not invited the following year.
But what I find very interesting is indeed that, say fashionable intellectuals or leading journalists from the Financial Times or the Economist or the New York Times, and they get together and they have, if you look at these periodicals, they have a certain outlook. So that you saw that with Corona, you saw an echo chamber.
Yeah.
You see that with Russia, Ukraine, you see that climate change very strongly. You see that also on immigration, a lot of immigration, it should be better regulated. And
censorship, free speech.
So that's all, quite clear. That is one specific mindset. And then they go back to their offices and they put it into practice.
But they regard themselves as the guard dogs of these various orthodoxies.
Yeah,
that's my main problem with the Davos, because I can perfectly get that important people, let's put it this way, think it's useful to get together a couple times a year. You have the G20, you have Bilderberg, you have Davos. Fine, of course, sure. That's also happening at the Dutch national level, where we, as the leaders of our respective parties in parliament, have dinner twice a year behind closed doors to just chat a little bit, or a cup of coffee or whatever. I think that's normal. The problem is, they are only fighting like-minded people. Their goal is not to have a proper open discussion where we have the 10 main themes and we have a proponent and an opponent and let's think. That's not the point of it. And that's my problem with the Davos.
Absolutely, it's bad education for our rulers.
Not primarily the constitutional aspect, because if Rutte came back home, the Dutch parliament could still say, we don't agree with this program, we don't agree with that legislation. So I don't think there's a real infringement of the sovereignty of the Netherlands, or an infringement of the constitution. It's rather that they have created this echo chamber that gives them the sense of a closed mindset, a closed mind. Everybody agrees migration is a natural phenomenon that we can't do anything about.
There are implications for sovereignty, because the World Economic Forum, I believe about 10 years ago, signed a cooperation agreement with the United Nations, which is incredible when you think about it, because the United Nations is supposed to represent the governments of the world, and here you have a private organization signing a strategic agreement with the United Nations to implement the famous Sustainable Development Goals.
Not to implement, but to help catalyze it, to help promote.
Yeah. But as I'm sure you know, and many of our viewers know, the famous video where Schwab boasts of penetrating the cabinets of various... No?
We penetrate the governments.
I don't know.
Penetrate the
because I think it's more than just to get together. It has an agenda. It may not have had an explicit...
It does have an agenda,
yes,
absolutely.
Of course, you know that, The Great Reset, obviously, the Great Opportunity, Build Back Better, all those slogans and so on, including transhumanism, but above all, climate. The Great Reset, as I don't need to tell you, was principally about the climate. Principally about
certainly,
climate.
And also the abolition of the democratic system as we know it,
and
as it's enshrined in our constitutions, in the British Constitution, French Constitution, Dutch Constitution, and what you formulated about the way they are influenced, our leaders. I think that the constitution, as we have it, is based on that system of dialogue or clash of opinions.
Yeah.
So what should happen? That is that our Minister of Defense, Ollongren. I don't think she knows a lot about geopolitics and about Russia, and it would be very good for her to get some education. But Davos is it's not going to happen there.
So
and that's
the key
also
point
worrying.
is it's a manufacturing of consent and it's an echo chamber. That's the basic point.
For me, yes.
Yeah, I think I agree there. Yeah. And then it invites you to think in managerial terms and all that. So it's very much in the direction of implementation.
The deeper question, of course, is then why is it trying to create a consent with regards to these specific subjects and themes? So what's the hand behind Klaus Schwab, who I tend to agree with you, is a very man of moderate intellectual means, and not an interesting guy in himself, not a powerful broker in himself. He's just a marketing man, and he's very vain, I think, and he's very self-important and narcissistic. But he's not. So he is speaking to the stakeholders of the World Economic Forum, the big donors, I suspect also the American government and a few other big players that are telling him, let's disinvite Putin. Let's stop inviting people who think the fossil fuels should not be outphased.
No. But
what's happening there?
For big oil, for example, very important is always high prices. So by curtailing investment in new exploration, you keep up this, because it's necessary to have oil and gas.
But when Trump was the president of the United States, he was unable to change the invitation policy of the World Economic Forum. So it's not that there's a direct line from the White House straight to Davos. That's not the way it works.
He was not interested so much.
Yeah, well.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But
it's
you expect
zeitgeist
some smoky room where
it's just
where
it's a
Blofeld
question.
is.
Why is Bono invited and Kanye West not? Why is that? Someone at some point will have to have said.
Well, there's a mainstream clearly that consists of a majority now, certainly including the big media corporations and all that. There's some sort of a mainstream where it's generally agreed that climate change is a big problem and it's human created, so humans are a big problem. Migration is a given, and it needs to be done in a more.
But there's only a consensus because they create the impression of consent.
Yeah, so where it stems from is hard to say, but I think that's currently the mainstream.
What representatives from the BRICS countries are going to be there? Do we know that?
Well, China has had a big historical role in Davos.
Yeah, and they have their own conference as well.
And indeed, they have a Davos. They have a World Economic Forum conference in China every year. I think that may be slightly cooling at the moment, but it's a very long relationship. The first Chinese delegation went to Davos in the very early on in the early 70s, if I'm not mistaken, under Deng Xiaoping. Certainly, when China began its long process of economic reform. And when Trump was elected, Xi Jinping in 2017 addressed the World Economic Forum in person in Davos. Because China, of course, at that stage was campaigning in favor of continued global free trade and against Trumpian protectionism.
Yes.
And he was welcomed with extraordinarily servile eulogies by Schwab. Who said, you know, you have shown us the way, the principles that must guide us on our common path and things like this. But when Trump came, he said, you're a very controversial man, so we have to listen to you. It wasn't quite the same elements of language. But how it is now, I have to say I don't know. I mean, I expect that there's for many years and indeed more than a decade, there's been a very, very big Chinese presence, both from the state and also from Chinese companies. Perhaps they continue to go for business reasons.
Is Viktor Orban invited?
I assume so.
But
I
it
don't
would be
know.
interesting to know what the funding is coming from what parts of the corporate sector or maybe certain governments. Is that public knowledge?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. There's a list at least of the formal members who pay up to 200,000. I think.
Yeah.
But you have to be accepted as a
Yeah.
donor, of course.
Yeah.
But do all those stars? Does Leonardo DiCaprio is he prepared to pay a lot of money to be gazed at such a
50,000 is not a lot of money for him, of course.
No,
So that's
no,
the
of
first
course
thing.
he
I
can
mean,
pay it. He can,
one
he can
flight
pay
with his
it, but-
private
but-
jet already costs $250,000, so it doesn't. He doesn't care, does he?
Or do those stars think that is it a kind of supporting
Status.
the good cause thing for them?
Badge of honor.
That's
I think.
yeah, perhaps I don't know. I have no idea.
The
Actually.
rich are usually not famous, so they love to be with people who are famous. The famous are, they are wealthy, but maybe not so incredibly wealthy, and they like them to be with Bill Gates and what have you.
Yeah.
So that's a possibility.
But why do we not from the House of Parliament, the House of Commons? Why don't we object there? Why don't political parties say, well, this is a kind of competition for democracy? What's growing there is a new kind of government, a kind of world government supported by a group of people that we do not support. So it's competition for democracy, and we want to defend democracy in the way it's enshrined in the Dutch constitution.
Yeah.
So a motie van afkeuring
Yeah.
for the
But we need
ministers
to
who go there.
articulate our complaints, and that's what we're trying to prepare here, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
And we need to articulate why we do not
why?
like this. And when you say, well, it's simply a congress where you meet a lot of people, what's the problem?
Networking
Conference.
opportunity. That's what. often
And we
say.
need to give more details why we think it's not a good idea, or at least you need to be very critical. And that has to do with the manufacturing of consent, but with the invitation policies that are not always clear and all that. So I think it's important for the next time that we prepare in the Tweede Kamer
Yeah.
to be more explicit on what exactly our problems are with this whole phenomenon.
Yeah.
Or start a counter phenomenon.
Well, that's the other interesting thing. That's the other thing that I was going to ask you guys. So if we can agree that ever since the 1970s, a very particular agenda has been dominating probably the most important platform for world leaders that has existed, which is the World Economic Forum in Davos. And this particular agenda has been Atlanticist, environmentalist, pro-migration movements, pro-transnational governance structures like the European Union, like the Euro currency, like the World Trade Organization, and so on.
Well, also
European Court of Human Rights.
the Washington Consensus, huh?
All of that.
All of that. So that is deregulation, privatization, also of parts
corporatism.
of the government apparatus, which basically cannot function really in a market. You know, like a water supply or the parts of the public network sector.
Right. But anyway, so if we agree that this agenda has been positioned to be presented as a consensus at this particular place, but also that this is by no means objectively a consensus, that there have been countless voices, political leaders, business leaders, intellectuals,
Scientists,
authors,
everything.
scientists, whatever. Why have they, for over 50 years since it has been in existence, and during those 50 years, not even the slightest oppositional organization has been created by no one. Not even by Argentina or Brazil or Russia, for that matter, or the Palestinian Authority, or it doesn't matter, Tibet, Australia, I don't care who would be able to do that. But why, or a couple of businessmen or Russian oligarchs, why haven't they gotten together and said, look, These guys,
There are initiatives.
like what?
Well, they're not as successful by any means. But
I've never heard of anything.
you mentioned Russia. There's a thing called the Dialogue of Civilizations, which, as far as I know, is now finished. But I went once or twice, 2 or 3 times in Rhodes, on the Greek island of Rhodes, and that was profiled as a.
Yeah.
I don't know if they ever said anti-Davos or whatever, but
That-
it was very much the same idea. So there are initiatives.
So,
And then there are also competitors we're also competing on the same, but that's not what you're interested in. But there's a Crans-Montana, for example, as well. But there have been some. But indeed, I think that the soft power, the alternative soft power of BRICS or whatever, is extremely lacking.
Yeah, and then the intellectuals, this Jordan Peterson, he a year ago or a little bit longer ago came with some initiative.
Oh, that's it. Which has taken place. It's
Yeah,
taken
yeah,
place
true.
now in London. Indeed, yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
But all
It's
of
not publicized so much.
no, they had some speeches and things, but it's. I just find it very odd that there's
little opposition.
for 50 years they've been pushing the agenda of letting go of sovereignty. Why hasn't there? You can simply state it. This anti-Davos conference is in favor of sovereignty, against immigration, does not believe in the environmentalist agenda, is against censorship and blah blah blah. We do not believe that. The state and the market should merge into this corporatist union,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. It wouldn't be too far-fetched to set that up, would it?
Why don't we?
I'm wondering whether China...
Well, that's a very that
What?
would be the ultimate.
Well, yes.
In my view, the conclusion of
set
this
that up.
session.
We
but-
could set it up.
I mean,
I'm wondering if China. It'd be interesting. I have to look and see what China's role is in this year's one, because I suspect that with the big shift towards a multipolar world, I wonder if China is not going to start taking its distances from Davos. China, after all, unlike other great powers, has very substantial soft power. It's very present in universities all over the world. It has an enormous network of of soft power. I wonder if, and China does think, at least for itself, not necessarily for everyone else, but definitely thinks in terms of national sovereignty for itself. It's extremely defensive of its national sovereignty. So maybe the Chinese should start thinking about, perhaps with other BRICS countries. But BRICS, for example, does, as far as I know, does no soft power activity at all.
No.
Like Russia, by the way. Russia doesn't do any. India doesn't do any.
In contrast
Brazil
to
and
what
so
our opponents
Yeah,
think.
exactly. But China does do a lot, so we'll see. Maybe they'll...
No, but we shouldn't necessarily connect this to BRICS. But I do agree that there's a completely different frame of thinking possible, where there's a lot of interesting debate to be set up. And, well, there's a gap there, obviously, that we could fill.
Well, yeah. Well, okay, fine. Yeah. I'm a little bit, I wouldn't say tired or fed up, but sort of jaded by this constant conclusion that everything falls on our plate. It's like, why we don't have 10 or 15 billion dollars in our bank accounts. I mean, I'm talking about such people, the seriously powerful players. Why don't they get together, set up this fund, get a board of people? And I would love to be on this board, an advisor, whatever, do whatever. But you need, and then you need some serious industrialists, and then you need to have politicians and intellectuals with a little bit of courage to get together and really get this going. I mean, it's fine that in some backwater in Europe, the Netherlands, some guy says, "Okay, I'm going to set up a counter." That's fine, but it's not but it's serious in any sense. So it's
Again, I wonder if there aren't changes underway. Musk, for example, Elon Musk is taking more and more explicitly political positions. I expect he's been invited to Davos, but I wonder if he will be now, because he's obviously in the crosshairs of the European Commission. He's very much persona non grata from the globalist point of view. So he would be a good.
Well, for instance,
that would be a nice substantial fortune to start with.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a couple of super chats. Schwab last called libertarianism a threat to the system. What can we expect from the Davos Club to oppose free markets and macroeconomic developments like the BRICS, says Selex for €11. John.
What can we expect from the Davos Club to oppose free markets?
That's what they've been doing since the start. Because corporatism is the opposition of free market. So maybe it's important to explain this point, because the left constantly says that we live in an age of privatization and the unrestrained market has destroyed public good. And that's not how we view it, is it, John?
I think there's a substantial confusion between free markets and free trade. It's much more important to have a free market, or rather a lawful market, as I prefer to call it, than to have free trade, because free trade has become a globalist ideology for at least 20 or 30 years. You know, why should imports be taxed at 0% and labour taxed at 30 or 40%? Why? I'd like to know why. You know, surely there should be some kind of balance at least.
But John,
so why don't we tax them both at 25%, for instance, or 20%?
But a truly free market requires, a lot of competition, and that not one firm or a few firms have dominant positions, market power, and with big tech and big finance. You see that concentration going on, and that is harmful for a good functioning of markets if there are too few players who are too big.
Of course, yeah.
And they extract.
But the question is also, what will BRICS do, what will Davos do about BRICS? So I think that's an extremely important question. It's in the early stages yet, but we all know the great declarations that Xi Jinping made in March of 2023, when he went to Moscow and said, we are making changes that we have not seen for 100 years. There's persistent talk about a BRICS currency, de-dollarization and so on. Yeah. These are, if they happen, these are tectonic shifts, which will radically change. And as we know, the American debt is... there are so many zeros. There are so many zeros in the American debt that not even Joe Biden can get a handle on whether it's billions or trillions. And this is clearly, and so the developments, including obviously Saudi Arabia and so on, which, as you know, started to sell oil in currencies other than the dollar. These are the big geopolitical changes, much more than abstract things like free markets. If people start trading in the Chinese currency or in a BRICS currency or in gold or whatever, that will be a severe blow to the American empire.
But the World Economic Forum has had its longest time now, I think. I mean, the BRICS will put enormous pressure on that whole structure, I suppose.
Yes, exactly.
But that's basically, I suppose that's my underlying question. Is there, apart from these things like, we're going to trade in a different currency, or we're going to have certain canals controlled by us rather than by you guys or whatever, is there an idea behind it? Because that is the thing about Davos and Davos men and the ideology of liberalism and everything that substantiates it. They do have a vision of where we're going with the world, and it may not be our vision. Clearly, it isn't. But at least they have their intellectuals, they have their columnists in their newspapers, they have their middle of the, sort of center right or center left politicians. That they have BlackRock and other investment vehicles that express an ideology. So it's all there. It's in itself, I think, more or less consistent worldview. I mean, it's a certain. I don't agree with it, but it's
a death cult, basically.
But I think.
Well, I mean, they have a vision of
BRICS. I think the BRICS countries also have a collective.
But where can we read it? Who is expounding it?
Earlier on,
it's not being expounded centrally. There isn't a BRICS Davos. There's an alternative Davos. But
Alexander Dugin. But that's it.
Yeah, but
that's the only philosopher of the BRICS.
That's true, but at the national level, China has a national or nationalist conception of itself as a state. Mm-hmm. India does. Russia obviously does. Brazil, I don't know, but I think there is if only by counter-reaction against Davos man, I think there is, and now has been for some time. So they haven't. It's true they haven't institutionalized it, and they should. But who knows? Maybe it's coming.
No,
Maybe
but the climate change, that sort of thing. And I've never read something that's 180 degrees different.
Right.
From
bricks.
From bricks-ish environment. It's a bit more skeptical, perhaps, but there's not a clear view.
We're a little less, a little slower, but not
yeah.
we don't. First, we don't even believe it's a fossil fuel. Oil. Secondly, we don't believe in man-made climate change. Thirdly, even if there were, we don't believe we should combat it by preventing.
That's certainly not the official view of Russia, for instance.
No,
But
no.
for what these folks who are assembling there in Davos is concerned, aren't we looking too much for a depth which is not there? Because we started discussion with, these people have a fairly closed mindset. It's the echo chamber, and folks are, this is the issue of our time, the climate. 30 years ago, it was, what was it? Zure regen, and the Club of Rome and so forth.
That's also environmentalism.
That's environmentalism. But a lot of that was resolved because the air became purer and purer because of technology and regulation of polluting businesses, and that was that. But apparently, corporate elites and government elites, for sure, they need some focus, or what are the big issues of our time, and then to act on it. And that is it's the horror vacui, You have to have some idea.
Yeah, that's definitely true for most of the people that go there. But as I think we also discussed is someone at some desk is saying yes, no, yes, no, yes to the possible invitees. And they only invite people that agree with their fundamental opinions, their fundamental beliefs.
Right.
And so
with the mainstream.
Therefore, so they follow the mainstream, but it's in several subjects. It's hard to define what the mainstream is. It's being defined by Davos rather than Davos following it. When Davos says, okay, this is the mainstream now. For example, with regards to the situation in Ukraine, it's absolutely not consensual in the world that we should all side with Ukraine and Ukrainian sovereignty should be defended at all costs and so on. That's not the consensus, but it will be the consensus at Davos. I dare you to find 5 or 6 major speakers there that have expressed a different view with regards to that. So there is clearly. It's not just that they just pick the top 500 people that have been in the media and in business and in politics in the world randomly. No, they have a particular invitational policy,
of course,
which is conducive to an agenda.
Makes the comparison with an ordinary parliament. So in the people invited to the conference, that's the ultimately, I suppose, Schwab or a successor or the people working with, they decide who gets invited and not. And in an ordinary parliament, we have elections. Yeah? Basically, if Davos is the World Economic Forum has power, then we should have elections about the people who go there, basically. Especially if we pay.
Yeah.
Yes, but we should
insist on greater diversity of views at the table.
I think things are going to sort themselves out. I'm not usually given to optimism, on the contrary, but I think that the great changes in history take place over the span of a lifetime, and we are very soon
only halfway our life.
What?
We are only halfway our life, so...
No, but I'm talking about the creation of the European Union, the creation of the United Nations. All these things took place 75 to 80 years ago, which is the natural lifespan of most people or most men. It's a typical lifespan. And
And
Schwab,
institutions.
by the way, of course, embodies this. Although I personally think that Schwab will live forever. I think I think he's like one of those
He's an
tortoises.
alchemist.
He's a tortoise. No, I think he's like one of those tortoises you find on the Galapagos Islands or whatever. I think he's
300
probably
years.
200 years old already.
Can I just
he'll live
voice
another
one more complaint about our side, as I would like to say it. So if you can just list all these fundamentals of the faith of Davos, right? So migration, environmentalism, supranational structures, and so on. Our side, those who are opposed to all these things that they promote there and that they present as being consensual, our side does not seem to understand the importance in general. So it's not just the BRICS, but also just people that I know. They do not seem to understand the importance of networking as such. And this has been a very consistent observation that I've made for many years since I've been active in the political
But
field.
do you not think it's just because we haven't got the money, we haven't got the financial firepower behind us? If we had, as you said, 50 or whatever many billions or millions, we could easily set up a Davos. We've got the networks. We have got the networks.
No, the networking
Well-
as such, we tend to be not so good in. Maybe the people who have not so much depth, no clue where it's heading to, that they are actually very good networkers.
Yes.
They compensate.
Yes.
So it's a good sign to have a network. I'm not sure if that.
Alex has a super chat for 22 euro. Thanks, Alex, and nice to hear from you again. I hope you're well. How might centralization of government, as in WEF's initiatives, align or conflict with Christian moral principles? And what do you think are potential implications for creating a utopian society without having Christian morale? John, this is definitely a question for
Well,
you.
there are no Christian principles, moral or otherwise, in Davos. It's a Christianity-free zone, as far as one can tell. And quite specifically, it is Malthusian. Davos is very clearly Malthusian. In other words, it believes in overpopulation. It believes that there are too many people. That's the whole unspoken agenda. It's occasionally spoken, by the way. I've seen clips of a rather peculiar-looking Indian man with long white hair saying, "I'm saying out loud what nobody else is saying." out
we
loud."
need less people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And clearly, that is the underlying agenda. And it, by the way, slipped out. In
You
fact,
know what Christian Democrats in the Netherlands would say? Well, it's also very Christian to take care of the environment, right? It's also God's creation.
well, it slipped out.
Rentmeesterschap. You're right. That's exactly the word.
It slipped out, in fact, in Prince Charles, as he then was, a video for the Great Reset. The Great Reset, there was a big video in June 2020.
Yeah.
And he, at one point, there's a slight slip of the tongue, and he says, I want our economy to be more planet-oriented. And later he corrects himself, and he says people-orientated, but actually the planet. And then later on in the same video, he personifies the planet and refers to her in English as she and her.
But we also, I think, we also
exactly,
need
Mother
to
Earth,
clarify
exactly.
something about
So there are no Christian principles
Because-
at all. It's on the contrary, and of course with transhumanism and so on, and this obsession. By the way, Alex Jones in his Tucker Carlson interview had a wonderful moment. It's about 3/4 of the way through. It's near the end where he suddenly goes off on one about how these people hate humans and they hate the population and so on. It's a moment of great philosophical depth, actually. I never expected it from Alex Jones, but he proved himself to be an immensely profound thinker. And that's my response.
But there's also something that what we define as Christian.
To this, Alex, here.
Yes, of course. Yeah. But it's not the current Vatican. Paul, you were at the Vatican Museum in Rome, of course, a couple of days ago.
Certainly.
But I think the current Vatican is in many ways very unchristian, and I'm not sure you're.
The Pope is
of
a
course-
heretic. The Pope is
Pope is a heretic,
quite clearly
yeah.
a heretic. There's really no doubt about that.
I think it's
at all.
impossible for a pope to be a heretic in the same way that it's impossible for Dutch Parliament to make unconstitutional laws
Exactly,
because
yes.
the Pope is infallible. Isn't
Yes,
he?
indeed.
So he
Indeed.
cannot
no,
be
no,
a
it's,
heretic.
I am myself
By
a heretic
definition.
of Vatican I. I think that Vatican I, the council which proclaimed papal infallibility, was itself
I've been at the Campo dei Fiori, yeah,
with the Giordano Bruno.
Ah, Giordano Bruno, 1600, burnt at the stake.
Oh yes,
there.
Giordano Bruni. Yeah.
And it's the only heretical figure there who gets an official place in
He was
it's-
extremely radical, wasn't he?
yeah,
Giordano
well,
Bruni.
yeah,
Wasn't he?
Yeah, well,
Or am I mistaken?
in cosmology, he was basically defending Galileo later.
Oh,
but it's
okay,
all
no,
it's all about Galileo and not about Bruno. That's surprising. I saw at the streets in Rome. I saw announced a play on Galileo, and then again and again, Galileo is always presented as the great critic, the scientific critic of the Vatican, but never Bruno. I don't see it. And it's only when you go to the Campo dei Fiori and drink a cup of coffee in the Café Eretico,
Okay.
so the Heretics Cafe in front of the statue, that you get acquainted with Bruno. Santo Bruno.
I'm still waiting for the next super chat, by the way. I'm just telling the editors of this. Oh, this was everything. Okay. Oh, that's a shame. So, guys, I think you should definitely continue asking us things because we have another subject to discuss, which is something very topical, and I'm sure it will have interlinks with the World Economic Forum, the main subject of tonight, which is something that you wanted to bring up, John, which is the complaint that has been filed by the International Court of Justice in
By South
Hague,
Africa, yeah.
by South Africa against Israel.
Yeah.
Can you just give us a
Well, it's
very
an
brief...
absolutely fascinating development for all kinds of reasons, historical reasons, political
Right.
reasons.
Yeah.
Historical because the idea of having a court of arbitration which would settle differences between states is historically very old. It dates back at least to the 17th century. And was, of course, institutionalized with the creation of the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague in 1899, the first supranational body to be created, and then succeeded by the Permanent Court of Justice and now the International Court of Justice, still in The Hague. It's interesting philosophically or symbolically because genocide, the Nazi genocide, is the supreme, the absolutely all-engulfing
point of
moral reference point for
Yeah,
our
right.
world. Negative, of course, but
Yeah.
it is the absolute, unimpeachable and totally dominating moral reference point, isn't it?
The G word.
Yeah,
is
but
it-
we all know that every debate, and it doesn't even end in Hitler; it starts in Hitler, and so on. So it's an immensely, from the point of view of our own societies, immensely important. And of course, it's also interesting legally. I mean, I'm very interested in international justice because it'll be very interesting to see how the court rules, because the court itself now is in a sense on trial. It's not just Israel is on trial.
Let's bring everyone up to speed with this a little bit because
So
it
South
might
Africa-
not have had the
South Africa-
coverage in the Netherlands as you might think.
So the International Court of Justice is the supreme judicial body of the United Nations. All countries belong to the United Nations, and therefore all countries are supposed to recognize the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. But it doesn't.
And so just for the Dutch audience, I'm just going to translate a little bit because I think this is difficult subject. Het is het internationaal gerechtshof en dat is dus niet te verwarren met het internationaal strafhof. Het internationaal strafhof dat berecht personen. We hebben bijvoorbeeld een voorloper was dan het Joegoslavië-tribunaal waar Milosevic terecht is gesteld en zo. Dat is ook in Den Haag. Voorburg zit dat, maar dus dat is het ICC in het Engels. En dit is het ICJ in het Engels, dus internationaal gerechtshof, IGH in het Nederlands wordt het afgekort. En dat zit al in Den Haag sinds het begin, sinds de oprichting, met de oprichting van de Verenigde Naties in 1945, 1946. En dat zit in het Vredespaleis in Den Haag. En dat zit daar omdat het, zoals John ook uitlegt, inderdaad een uitvloeisel is van al heel lang dat landen zeggen van ja, moeten we niet een soort oorlogsrecht hebben, dat we elkaar toch een beetje in toom kunnen houden. En daar is dus nu een hele interessante zaak, and that's where you're going to take off again from me, neergelegd, waarbij Zuid-Afrika Israël aanklaagt. En dat is waar John precies was. Want waarom is dat nou zo'n historische zaak? So why is this such a historical case?
The word aanklacht is not exactly right, because it's not a criminal jurisdiction. It's what they call an application, and the court will then be invited to give certain emergency measures. The rulings have no force. There's no legal force. It's not a criminal jurisdiction. Yeah. It's a international law jurisdiction. But yes, South Africa
is better word.
So South Africa has made this application to the International Court of Justice to express a desire for emergency provisions against Israel, basically to cause it to stop its operation in Gaza, on the basis that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, and that Israel's goal in Gaza is to eradicate the Palestinian population in whole or in part, to quote the Genocide Convention.
Which seems not really their objective at all.
Well,
okay.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I
judicial elements of the case. That's not why it's so interesting, is it?
But it's interesting on many levels.
Is calling in place, and I think that's the most relevant thing: universal jurisdiction. That any nation can bring to court any other nation.
It's not strictly speaking universal jurisdiction, because there is a convention which states have signed. So Israel and South Africa and all the other states in the world have signed the Genocide Convention. So they have delegated, if you like. Of course, it's not a supranational jurisdiction in the sense of...
Why is this a novel case? Because you haven't said that yet. Just say it, please.
Well, it's not novel. There have been other applications.
Why is it so interesting?
It's interesting because obviously the Israeli issue is extremely important for the whole world, for the peace for the Middle East, but also for world geopolitics. It's interesting from the as I say, symbolic and historical point of view because of the resonance of the Nazi genocide. It's interesting to me from a legal point of view, because the ICJ has ruled, they may have ruled on more than one occasion, but it has ruled on another genocide application, which was made by Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1992 against Serbia. And from the very beginning of the Bosnian War, Bosnia alleged that Serbia, then Yugoslavia, had a genocidal intent towards the Bosnian Muslims.
Yeah.
And the Hague ruled many years later, in 2007, that in fact there hadn't been a genocidal intent, and it retained the I can't say condemnation because again it's not a criminal jurisdiction, but it retained the finding of genocide only for Srebrenica, because Srebrenica had already been ruled on by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, also based in The Hague. So the International Court of Justice said, well, the ICCTY has ruled that this was genocide, so we're not going to, we accept that as a judicial finding. But they rejected all the other aspects of the Bosnian case, even though undoubtedly the Bosnian Serbs, like all the other parties in the Bosnian War, had of course practiced ethnic cleansing. So when a village or a town was taken, people tended to be expelled, or at least they tended to flee. In other words, the ICJ has set the bar in its own jurisprudence quite high by not finding that the Serbs were guilty of genocide or were practicing genocide in Bosnia. And therefore the political, that's what makes the political thing, because I think that all outcomes of the ICJ, all outcomes are bad, for international law, and I'm very pleased that they're bad for international law because I don't believe in international law. I think all outcomes are bad for the West. And that's why I said
explain why?
I will. That's why I was saying earlier that I think that we are at a big tipping point in history. I've mentioned Elon Musk, I've mentioned BRICS, I've mentioned de-dollarization. I think that this application for genocide is another element, another part of the puzzle. Because if the ICJ finds that Israel is not committing genocide and that there is no prima facie evidence for genocide, then two things will happen. First of all kinds of brutal military operations will effectively be given the green light. So countries will say, okay, fine,
then you have
we can do it.
ordinary
But
war
even
law.
more importantly, yes, indeed, but that's all left aside because the international humanitarian law activists are so obsessed with genocide. In a way, they've pitched too high.
Yeah.
They've all said it's genocide. They could have said it's crimes against humanity. They could have said it's war crimes. No, they wanted the absolute top condemnation, and probably they've aimed a bit too high.
Yeah.
But
Or
what I'm saying is
will
politically.
condemn Israel, in which case it will lose the West.
Hang on.
So
but,
either way,
but either way, because if they don't condemn Israel, then the court will appear as the whole global South will say, "Come off it." The global South will say, "This is ridiculous. How can you say it's not genocide?" And obviously, if they do condemn Israel, which I don't think is particularly likely, but if they do, then again also.
obviously, yeah.
So either outcome, and above all, I think for international law, I think the outcome, because the whole, we mentioned the Ukraine war earlier, that's all based on the notion of a rules-based international order, all right? But Benjamin Netanyahu has already declared that nothing is going to stop Israel, not even The Hague. So he has announced,
Or the U.S.
well, he has announced that he is not interested in the rules. We make the rules, we will defend ourselves.
But
which
look, John, I have questions about the importance of this actually, because ever since the famous or infamous Nicaragua case, the United States have effectively said they were not interested in the outcomes of the ICJ, and they just brushed it aside
Of
at
course.
every moment, every chance they had. They even adopted the Hague Invasion Act against the ICC.
Yes, yes.
So
No,
I don't
everything
think
is
it will
decided
be
by force.
What I
And,
think the
no,
ICJ
but
will
that's why
simply
I say
say
that-
is, look, it's maybe ethnic cleansing in certain areas, but it's not genocide. There, but severe war crimes have perhaps been committed, possibly, but we will rule against emotion, but we'll have several dissenting opinions, and it will just disappear
Yes,
on the
but the-
big
yeah.
pile
Yes,
of
but
jurisprudence
I
of the
repeat,
ICJ, I'm afraid.
that of course I agree that everything is settled by force. I don't believe international. Lord Salisbury said in 1887, international law does not exist as
not
law.
law.
It's not law. It's wishful thinking. So I
Might
agree with
makes
that.
right.
But this, the fact that they have taken this case on genocide, which indeed I think will end with a mealy-mouthed,
Flippy-floppy.
exactly, flip-flop, means that this, once again, this jewel in the crown of international law, which is genocide, will emerge from this irreparably damaged. And with it, the whole notion of the rules-based international order and therefore the hegemony of the West.
Not necessarily, I think, because it's a well-reasoned position, and then there's many other grounds, like humanitarian law infringements and so forth, that can be brought to bear.
Yeah, I think so too. I thought.
But, sorry, what are you saying? I'm not. I don't understand your point. What are you saying?
That other grounds can be argued, that then like humanitarian law, which has been infringed.
Other
by the
grounds can be argued
Israelis.
by whom? By South Africa?
By South Africa.
Yes,
or
but they
by
haven't. That's the point. They haven't. They in a way they perhaps should have gone for the more for the easier option, but they've instead gone for the absolute top. And I think by doing that, they will empty the legal and political significance of genocide of all content, and with it, the moral authority, because these things are not reasoned about profoundly. People will simply react on an emotional level like they do in all politics. And they will say, as I say, if the court doesn't find against Israel, they will just say, well, they're a bunch of Western puppets. And of course, if they did find against Israel, then that would be a colossal moral blow to American hegemony. It would be, symbolically. It would be. It would be.
No, I think that-
because the whole of American hegemony is based on moral superiority.
I don't
I don't
hear-
think it's likely.
I
That
didn't
if it
hear-
happened, it would be a colossal blow. No, why don't you?
I didn't hear of any colossal blow or outcry about, for example, that ruling about the Bosnian Muslims, that what the Serbs did was not genocide.
No, because
by the way, people have
retained
short
genocide
memories.
for Srebrenica. They retained genocide for Srebrenica. So they said, but only because another court had ruled already on the subject.
On that basis.
So it was a very
conflicting judgments. You sometimes see that, but if you do not look at that,
the collective memory is now that the Bosnian Serbs committed genocide. That is now in fact, you can be accused of genocide denial if you question Srebrenica. So it is a symbolic, and the Serb
big symbolic.
But I'm talking about the
big enough for genocide.
Well, that's my opinion.
Guys,
My opinion.
We have another super chat. Alex again for €11. Ralph often says, Ralph, there's no evil intent. Yet, as Berg noted, evil triumphs when good men do nothing. What actions does Ralph think are necessary to counteract influences of the World Economic Forum and anti-Israel movements? It's a double question. Ralph, what actions are necessary?
Well,
what should we do? Make Forum Inside?
No, but I think in general, and certainly in the Netherlands, the parliament should be a lot stronger and a lot more on itself rather than following the leads of these supranational structures such as World Economic Forum.
Yeah.
So you need both ministers or top politicians who have the courage to make their own decisions rather than follow the leader and follow the mainstream of WEF.
Yeah. Yes, but parliaments do not function like that. They function like that in textbooks, but in reality they don't. That's why I think the only thing, my 2 cents, but the only thing that I think can save us from this is the referendum.
Yeah.
The only thing,
that's the safety valve that we do need. I agree.
Countervailing power is a referendum with a free and open public debate. Yeah, that's the only thing to. But
there is also a lot happening.
The cartel,
now.
break the cartel.
Sure, but there is also a lot happening now on the popularity, I think, of the World Economic Forum.
Yeah.
I remember
that's
now.
True, but then they will set up something else.
Possibly, but there is a lot going on now. There is I forgot her name, unfortunately. There's a Canadian politician, woman who was openly very critical of those kind of things
in
that
Alberta.
we discussed so far. We penetrate the governments and that specific fragment, we penetrate the governments, and so that's shared by a lot of
but
people.
I think
and
more
so
generally, the let's say the power of supranational structures until a few years ago was hardly debated. It was an international given.
True.
And it was efficient, and why not?
Right.
And I think we've already changed that with our very small fraction in the Tweede Kamer. So when we strengthen our position, we can, I think, fracture the meaning of these structures.
I have heard there's a guy at a university somewhere who wrote a thesis on that in 2012. Was it? What? Forgot his name, but.
Yeah, I think he became a marginal politician.
Yeah, right. Something like that. Yeah.
Anyway, final words, gentlemen. I'm going to give the floor to all of you for your concluding thoughts and remarks, and we may still end up in discussing them a little bit. But Anton, I'm going to counterclockwise.
Okay.
So it's your turn first.
Yeah, I think that there's a term in Dutch like journalistiek. Things all of a sudden can change a great deal. That you have a change of the narrative.
Yeah.
So I think is this what we are witnessing about Ukraine? There was enormous confidence, and we're gonna beat these Russians, and it's gonna be marvelous, with all these weapons which we supply. And now there is the hesitation, and it will lead to another deadly year, and Ukraine will not win, but it might actually lose. And then you have enormous streams of refugees going to Western Europe. So we have to now take action this winter that put on the table land for peace. That's my view.
Did you see that this news that came out from Bild, a German magazine, yesterday, a newspaper, in fact, that apparently the Germans are now secretly preparing for mobilization against Russia? Did you guys see that?
Yeah.
I mean, this can't be serious, is it? What do you think?
No, the whole
It's
population
fear-mongering,
is stirred
isn't
up.
it? It's
Yeah.
fear-mongering.
I for one, am not signing up to this
You know.
kamikaze action. I mean, there's absolutely no point. in
No, but your point is
Going to
things.
war against
The
Russia.
direction of the wind can change, and then suddenly there's a change of narrative. I agree there.
And then
I think
land
that's
for peace.
Yeah.
well, whatever the change in narrative is, but
No, the Krim stays Russian. That's for sure. That was a present for Khrushchev, who came from Ukraine.
1953.
Yeah, 53. Yeah,
Was it? Yeah.
Come on.
Paul, final thoughts.
Perhaps the revelations on what happens in Virgin Islands or so. Those are moments that can occur, and then things can change. But let's start in the Dutch Parliament, and let's be critical about what is it? 4 people, 4 of our leaders are there. The Prime Minister Ollongren, the new and 2 new ministers.
I don't know.
But let's see what happens. And I think with the World Economic Forum, I think things will change. Perhaps it's not functioning in 5 years from now in the way it functions now, and that's I'm a bit optimistic about that.
It's actually interesting you're mentioning the Virgin Islands, because that makes me think of cryptocurrencies.
Right.
And that makes me think of the Bitcoin ETF that has just been approved
Good.
by the American Financial Market Authorities. So that's also going to be interesting, but I'm not sure if that's something that you guys are following. Well, maybe we should have another special
It's inactive.
on that. Excellent. John, final thoughts.
Well, I think that, as I say, institutions have the lifetime of humans, and we are at the end of the lifetime of a number of institutions: the United Nations, the European Union, and the world governance generally,
NATO,
which were set
hopefully.
up, and maybe even NATO, which were all set up about 75 or 80 years ago.
Yeah.
Their senescence is embodied by Biden, who is the Brezhnev of the American empire.
Brezhnev of the American Empire. I love that. I love that phrase.
And I think that these
Andropov.
and I agree with you. I didn't catch the Dutch expression, but in Latin it's motus in fine velocior. The movement is faster at the end, and things indeed I think are going. And this Israel thing, which was certainly by me unexpected, comes on top of all these other developments, and is far more important, I think, symbolically and politically than the Ukraine war. The atrocity propaganda coming out of Gaza has been devastating, far more effective than Ukrainian propaganda, far more effective.
Yeah.
That's why we were talking about the South African thing. The global South, I think, will align itself with the Palestinians and against Israel. Israel, which, as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says, is the aircraft carrier of the United States in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And so I think it comes on top of all these other things, of all these other developments, and that, as I say, I think that things could go very badly wrong, but they might perhaps also go for the better.
Yeah. Paul, what are you doing?
No, he was talking about Kennedy, and
I know he's one of your authors, but
We don't necessarily
we don't
have to
agree on
with
everything.
everything that
Okay. I put it back. Okay.
But still, anyone can order his book, and it's a great book, and it's a great guy.
Yeah.
But it's also literally impossible to run for presidency in the US and not be, well, it seems, not be completely and utterly pro-Israeli fanboy. That's just sort of, this is the single no-go subject. You can be in favor against migration, COVID policies, climate change, it doesn't matter. But just there's no way you can become president of the US if you even raise questions about Israel's behavior. Can you? What do you think? It's very odd, isn't it? Do you see a single candidate saying anything? Vivek is
No,
completely right? That's
Big subject for our last words, this.
well, I mean, I think that is
Biden may lose his presidency because there is in the Democratic Party quite activist faction who's advocating for the Palestinians. And then all these leftist Democrats, they say, well, then I don't vote at all. That is a possibility. That could happen. And I think that
that's
Trump
very
is a
interesting.
staunch Israel supporter. I
even
believe.
though Netanyahu screwed him over right after the first results came out of the election.
Okay.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree that this is a subject we should be talking about much more depth,
Yeah.
because the recent attack against Yemen, or at least against the Houthis in Yemen, is very interesting too. We saw that the Dutch
And our role
Prime
there.
Minister
Yes.
tweeted. So we're being. That's very interesting. I
And
thought
what is the
Parliament
nature
was
of this Dutch involvement? Do we know?
well support.
We have one
support.
liaison officer, I think.
Okay.
But it's,
But you
it's,
just never find out what the nature of the support is. We were support. Rutte said, "Okay, Ukraine, that's our war. It's our. Wait a minute, our war without
Yeah.
parliamentary vote on it.
Yeah.
That's very. So all these things, they move beyond.
But again,
Formal-
that's
But
another.
in
To
all
me,
these
that's
things-
another element in this accumulating pile of things which show the end of Western hegemony. The Royal Navy was going to send its aircraft carrier to the Red Sea. It can't because it doesn't have enough staff.
Right.
So Britain's Aden, and by the way, I don't need to tell you that the port of Aden is a nevralgic point in British imperial history.
Yeah.
And okay, since Suez, we know that we don't rule the waves anymore.
1956, yes.
But Aden, the British were thrown out of Aden in 1967, and the idea that we're now going to teach those nasty Houthis or Yemenis or whatever they are,
Britannia
give them a good
does
old
rule the
thrashing.
waves, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Head prefect Cameron is going to really teach them a lesson. It is so ridiculous. The whole thing is so shameful and embarrassing.
Yeah,
It's
and
relics
that
of old structures that
all
you
these-
see emerge.
all- that war cannot be managed. So the
Yes.
theory of war is escalation.
Yes.
And more
Yes.
weapon systems, more sensitive targets, and then the geography. It's a widening of the location of the war. So that is certainly a possibility that happens with Lebanon and Hezbollah, with the
Iran.
Iran is the bad. How do you say that? The bad
elephant in the room,
devil,
or
basically behind.
Well, it's the
walls.
big fish behind the smaller fish,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
But I think the situation with the Houthis might turn out to be rather like the situation in Afghanistan with the Taliban.
Yeah, I think it's an
They've been
underestimated
bombed-
situation.
They've
Yeah.
been bombed by Saudi Arabia for I don't know how
11
many
years.
10 or 11
They've
years.
been
I don't
bombing the
think
shit out of them.
I don't think that the Royal Navy turning up and lobbing a few
No, absolutely not.
shells over.
So the West is going to lose the Suez Canal. That's really, or at least the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, I'm sure, like you, I've seen all these figures about ships being rerouted around the Horn of Africa and the supply lines and so on.
That's very interesting.
And
because
everything is based on, isn't it? Is the House of Cards? You know, the
friend
casino
of mine-
No
capitalism.
one
that-
is applying any diplomatic pressure. I mean,
None.
Diplomacy is completely out of the window.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is the insanity you see today.
Yeah.
The immediate reaction also in the Netherlands is, okay, but
Let's
I mean,
bomb.
we rule these sorts of waterways. Come on.
the pirates.
Yeah,
Let's get
we have
those
a role to
Somali
play.
pirates out.
It's ridiculous. No one spoke to these people. It's insane.
But a friend of mine has been setting up camp in Panama for more than half a year now. Michael Yon, we know him.
Yeah.
And he says that the next front is going to be launched there. So we now have all these essential trade routes, let's say the Ukraine, the port to near Asia in a way, and the port to the road to the whole landmass of Southeast Asia. Then we've got the Suez Canal. And then Panama, which is second very important central canal. 10% of all global trade is going through that canal every year. Apparently, China is manifesting itself more and more predominantly in Panama as a counter, as a hedge, as it were, against the American attempts to keep Taiwan.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. If indeed China would try to capture Taiwan in the coming year or the coming 2 years, then and America strikes back, then Panama will be held hostage against the U.S.
Well,
which would absolutely be
a strong ally in Venezuela.
Oh yes, totally.
But
seems to be trying to expand its territory to Guyana as at present.
But
So,
the
that's
Americans
exciting.
were very efficient in extracting Noriega, the Panamanian president, from over there, and put him in jail in Florida.
At the
And
time.
So the Chinese
That's
have
right,
to
Noriega.
work hard in order to
The man who
Yeah,
extracted
sure.
him is now the head of the Office for Global Justice within the State Department, 20 or 30 years on.
Okay,
Yes,
so
yes. He's still a guy called Kozak, Michael Kozak,
Oh,
who was the author, or should I say architect, of the Rajak massacre that started the Kosovo War in 1999. These people have quite long careers.
the director-in-chief of it.
Yeah.
So, Rolf, final words for you for this marathon, this very long and very engaging conversation.
Well, let me say it's extremely interesting times. From the position of politics, I think for decades it hasn't been so complex and open-ended as it is today, which, well, as an observer is incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
So we live in interesting times, I would say. And I'm very curious to see what the reactions are to our English-speaking forum inside, because this is a new format that we have here.
Well, thank you very much, all of you.
I think perhaps we should do this weekly as well. So we have our weekly Dutch language show, which is obviously going to stay. But then, or bi-weekly or regularly, I think it's important to reach out and try to have international guests, maybe
let's see what the
through
reactions
Skype or
are.
whatever. Yeah. So guys, let us know what you thought of this. Don't forget to smash the follow button, and we'll hope to see you again very soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.